Hello, and welcome to Health Loss Simplified. This is our first episode, and it's titled Making Peace with Uncertainty, which is our theme right now, going into 2025 and a new administration and a lot of uncertainty. So, I'm Elizabeth Lippincott. I'm the founding member of Strategic Health Law, and I'm here with my colleagues Sandy Durkin and Katerina Wieses. And we're going to share some of our insights on what's going on right now and look forward to spending the time with you. Sandy and Katerina, do you want to say hi and say a few words about your background?
Yes, thank you. I'm so happy to be here with you today, Elizabeth and Katerina, and I'm really excited about this first episode. So, I'm Sandy Durkin. I've been with Strategic Health Law for 6 years, and I am a recovering litigator who now focuses on regulatory compliance and transactional work for managed care organizations and their business partners. And we've also got Katerina here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katerina. I'm the Associate Attorney at Strategic Health Law. I've been at SHL for 3 years, starting out with a fellowship while I was at Duke Law, and now having been here for a while. I do a lot of regulatory analysis as well as contracting work within the healthcare industry, focusing on Medicare Advantage.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I'm Elizabeth again. I founded this firm a little over 19 years ago after working in house with a health plan, and I focus on federal regulation of managed care. So, like I said, it's kind of an interesting time right now, and our goal is to create a forum where we can simplify some of the healthcare regulatory and legal developments that we're seeing and help business leaders make good decisions by, just sharing some of our thoughts.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Like you said, coming up on almost 20 years in the business, we're hoping to get some of your perspective, having seen a number of administration changes and how it impacts the industry. So, with that background, what do you see as hot button issues for managed care plans and their business partners going into 2025?
Yeah, thanks. You're right. I started working in house at a health plan at the end of the Clinton administration, and then have seen the different iterations over the decades. There's some common themes when things change. What I am focused on right now, as far as like hot button legal business hybrid issues, one is the pressure on Medicare Part D premiums. There were some, from a beneficiary perspective, really great enhancements to the Part D benefit from the Inflation Reduction Act, but some, I'll say, difficulties around how we're going to pay for those. We're not going to get into all the details around that Part D redesign and premium impact. That's really could be a whole episode, but the upward pressure on Part D premiums is a significant issue right now because it's likely to move people into Medicare Advantage plans, which can absorb that price increase with their other funding for medical costs. So that's one of the biggest themes that we're seeing. And then I think when the enrollment data for Medicare Advantage and Part D comes out for this January, I think we'll see some of the impact of that. And relatedly, just that's putting a lot of pressure on the Medicare supplement standalone Part D combined with original or fee for service Medicare option. So it's so fascinating to see this because when I started working in Medicare Advantage around 2004, 2005, only around 12, 13% of people with Medicare were in Medicare Advantage. So it was this alternate option. But what we're seeing now is that Medicare fee for service is becoming like the alternative option. And without any, real policy change, evidently Dr. Oz at one point said he'd like to see Medicare Advantage as a default option. I think it's kind of there. If we have in 2024 going into the enrollment for 2025, we already see like 54% of Medicare beneficiaries in Medicare Advantage. So that's one thing. And then Katerina knows a lot about this. She's been digging deep into it, but cyber resilience and cybersecurity are likely to be big themes and kind of big risk areas. And then I would say managing the risks of your vendors, related to the cyber resiliency, but other issues as well.
Thanks, Elizabeth. You've spoken to this a bit already, but do you see any other shifts in the senior market? I'm thinking in particular about MedSup and what your thoughts are on that line of business and strategies for companies for which that's an important line of business.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I do think MedSup is becoming sort of the alternate option. It's going to become increasingly difficult for people to afford a MedSup premium plus a standalone Part D premium on top of their Medicare Part B premium that everyone pays. So I think it's getting to be tough to manage the sort of shrinking risk pool in MedSup. Anecdotally, I've heard there's some increases for this year in the MedSup market. So that's going to be interesting to watch because there are a lot of real advantages to offering a Medicare Advantage plan. You can use funding from the medical side, depending on your bid amount, to offset the Part D premium. You can also use funding from the government to fund supplemental benefits that are attractive that you can still offer on Medicare supplement. It's just the beneficiary is going to pay 100% of the cost. And Medicare Advantage has a really powerful lobby in Washington. And so one thing I'm wondering is there a strong right now voice for Medicare supplement or Medigap, sometimes called issuers, because of the shifts that are driving enrollment in a different direction?
Thank you. I agree. It will be interesting to see. So, one question we've gotten over and over again are, what's going to change? What's happening in 2025? And I know we titled this Making Peace with Uncertainty, but there are a few areas where we do expect to see changes and others where the change will be slower or less significant. So some of the areas where we do expect to see change under a Trump administration include more flexibilities for Medicare Advantage organizations. As you said, Elizabeth, this administration and Dr. Oz are very keen on MA. So we expect to see expanded flexibility, which is more typical with Republican administrations, even before now, to incentivize MA organizations to offer plans that entice beneficiaries. So one way we might see that is with the expansion of plans' ability to offer supplemental benefits beyond what seniors can get under fee-for-service Medicare. Another area, and this is where we're starting to see a lot of reporting in the press, is we expect selective rollback of Biden-era policies. That seems to be a theme across departments in the executive branch, and we will see that within HHS and CMS. Some examples of policies where we could see CMS rolling back measures that were put out under the previous administration include the restrictions on broker compensation that CMS tried to roll out last year unsuccessfully. Those were ultimately challenged in court and are currently stayed, but it's possible that CMS will revisit those regulations and completely pull those out, or they could just let it play out in the courts. Another potential rollback is the new Health Equity Index that CMS introduced a couple of years ago as a new factor that is incorporated into star ratings, which are quality measures that consumers use to evaluate MA and Part D plan performance. The new administration is not a fan of anything that's associated with DEI, and the Health Equity Index is one example of a DEI style initiative that could just disappear. And then another change that may happen is the application of Section 1557, which is the Affordable Care Act's non-discrimination provision, to MedSup or Medigap plans. Those are commercial products. CMS late last year put out a rule that says that Section 1557 applies to MedSup plans, and that is an area where we could see the new CMS returning some flexibility to a line of business that is typically deemed to be outside of the sphere of federal regulation.
Yeah, I have to say, that seemed like a stretch for essentially a commercial insurance policy under the structure of that statute and the way it defines federal programs. But we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. CMS has the authority to do all of these things on its own, although it'll probably take some time and effort for CMS to do these if it chooses to accomplish them by regulation. And then another issue that the new administration might try to tackle is the Part D redesign, which we might just make that its own episode.
Yeah, we've got plenty.
It's so
plenty to
big,
say.
but they would need Congress to do that. So that would be a really big undertaking. It's not going to disappear overnight.
Although you're right, they'd need Congress to tinker with the redesign itself, but they wouldn't need Congress to undo that demonstration plan. Sorry, we're getting into it, but that would make the premium impact felt sooner rather than later. But
we're regulatory lawyers. We cannot help getting into the weeds.
It's
We
true.
will try to stay true to the title of the podcast, Health Law Simplified.
Stay tuned. Part D premiums. We have
less likely to change. Like I said, there's a couple areas where it's going to be same old, same old. MA is going to continue to grow. It may even accelerate given all the market factors and shifts in the senior market that are at play. That said, it's not going to be a free-for-all for managed care organizations offering government plans. There has been a spotlight on MA at the congressional level, at the level of press, policymakers, consumers for years. And there are a number of reforms that have been on the table that have bipartisan support. So, for example, there will continue to be a focus on pharmaceutical benefit managers, PBMs. I think that we will see potentially legislation from Congress on that topic. And then there will continue to be a policy and enforcement focus on prior authorization and risk adjustment, which are topics where MA organizations have received a lot of scrutiny over the last several years.
Sandy, when you talked about the growth of Medicare Advantage, I was really stunned to see in this last annual enrollment period for MA, carriers saying, as of right now, we're not going to pay commissions for these plans anymore. Like basically, they were getting more new enrollments than they wanted. I haven't seen that before. That was such a kind of signal that things are really changing in the market.
That is fascinating.
Yeah. So tell me, okay, so you introduced yourself as a recovering litigator. So from that lens, what kind of litigation risks do you think healthcare companies might face in the coming years? And how do they need to be thinking about that?
For better or worse, litigation risk does not go away, even if government enforcement goes down. So the biggest source of litigation exposure for MA organizations currently has been risk adjustment litigation. And that's not going anywhere because those cases are really driven by the relator provisions, the qui tam provisions in the False Claims Act, which allow individuals, whistleblowers to file suit. And there are financial incentives for them to do that. There's a really active plaintiffs bar recruiting potential whistleblowers to bring these cases. And there's also a lot of concerned employees who want to make sure that their employers are doing the right thing. So those cases, those incentives, they don't change depending on which party is in power. Another important thing for compliance departments and legal departments to remember is that the statute of limitations on the laws that govern these federal healthcare programs, they're really long. They outlast presidential administrations. The False Claims Act, which is a really significant source of exposure for plans, given its triple damages penalties, that has a statute of limitations period of 6 years from the date the alleged fraud was committed. And it can be extended even longer, 3 years past the date when the plaintiff should have reasonably known about the fraud. And then the anti-kickback statute, those cases generally need to be filed within 5 years of an alleged violation. So what this means is that activities that take place over the next 4 years, including provider incentive programs, marketing activities, risk adjustment programs, star ratings, quality initiatives, investments, transactions, deals, all of these really need to be carefully reviewed for compliance with these anti-fraud laws, the same as they would be under any other administration, because they can carry exposure for your organization, for more than half a decade.
That's a really good point, Sandy. So you don't want to go too crazy in 2025, 2026, unless something's like expressly authorized in a regulation. I think that would be different. But if it's just in a gray area, which there's so much of in this space, you have to assume that could be enforced by a new administration.
Absolutely. And another area which is always on our minds as healthcare lawyers is cybersecurity, a perennial risk. And I was hoping, Katerina, that you could speak to that and tell our listeners what healthcare organizations can do to manage their cybersecurity risks right now.
Absolutely. So, cybersecurity, the risk landscape is a little bit riskier for organizations than it really ever has been. Healthcare organizations, in particular, are an attractive target for cyber attackers because of protected health information. And in general, the amount of attacks that have happened have increased by basically double in the past 5 years. And when it comes to cybersecurity, there are really two sides to that coin. There is what you would traditionally think of as cybersecurity, and then there's cyber resiliency, which is how organizations react once an attack has happened, how they're able to keep the business going. So, for cybersecurity, organizations are going to have to work with both tech vendors and cybersecurity professionals to make sure they're mapping out where data in their organization is going, what tech vendors they're using, making sure that they're using best practices for things like multi-factor authentication and encryption. And then the other side of that coin, which can be forgotten about when cybersecurity is such a focus, is that resiliency. So any organization is going to have some kind of business continuity plan should an attack happen. But it's important to note that organizations are responsible not only for that plan existing, but that plan needs to work. One thing that can occur is that after a cyber attack, a larger organization will have either backup vendors or internal capacity to be able to keep going in the event of those attacks. So there's these sort of two sides to this coin. There's cybersecurity, and that involves working with professionals to make sure that best practices are being used, and resiliency, which is the ability to bounce back.
Hmm. And you think this is all coming from the Change Healthcare attack that disrupted the healthcare system?
Absolutely. So the Change Healthcare attack was, a big news event that now everyone is talking about cybersecurity and healthcare and what an attractive target for cyber attackers healthcare companies are. But it was part of a really big trend. There have been so many cyber attacks in the past 5 years, and Change Healthcare was just one aspect of that.
Yeah. And I can understand the government's perspective on this, especially if now, 54% and growing of the Medicare beneficiaries are in Medicare Advantage plans. They don't have the same level of control, although there's lots of regulation. It's not along the lines of what they have over the Medicare administrative contractors that process claims for original Medicare. So they're relying on this morass of different carriers and all of their vendors to protect this public beneficiary information, public program.
That's especially true when you keep in mind the fact that MA plans are responsible for all of their downstream contractors in CMS's view. So there's
Yeah,
all this, you mentioned the morass of different vendors. That is really significant for plans.
yeah, and growing every day. Everybody has a solution. A solution, which is great. Love entrepreneurs, but like, yeah, it's pretty high risk.
Thank you, Katerina. And speaking of solutions, Elizabeth, with all challenges come opportunities. So, what opportunities, if any, do you see for managed care organizations under the new administration or in this time?
Yeah, I think there'll be a lot of growth, especially in Medicare Advantage, MAPD plans. I will say something I said a lot in the first Trump administration is, deregulation feels a lot like regulation when it's happening to you. So lots of change. I do foresee flexibility. It could come in the form of like expanded flexibility of supplemental benefits, expanded benefit. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but there will be change, likely in the direction of more rather than less flexibility. There will be vendors, and I'm not knocking vendors, but this is an entrepreneurial country, and there will be companies coming up with ideas of how to do things better, take advantage of new opportunities, and so it's going to be really important for the health plans and providers that are using these vendors to make sure their contracts are appropriately negotiated to make sure that legal risk that vendors create are being passed down to them if they're, assuming they're able to like bear that risk, and that legal and compliance folks and cybersecurity folks are taking a real good close look at those vendors in the procurement process, um, even before the contracts are developed, so that they're making sure that this is a vendor that they can trust with this information in addition to whatever services they're having them do. And I would say it's really never a good plan to just take a vendor's contract, even if you attach your, regulatory addendum and it's, quote unquote compliant. If you got audited just on the language in that contract, it's not going to be enough to protect your organization from potential legal risk for what the vendor's doing for you. So lots of opportunity, but it's also going to be a lot of work to protect the long-term interests of healthcare companies, health plans, and otherwise in that expansion state. I'd say this is a gross oversimplification. I shouldn't say this publicly, but I'm going to anyway. Um, I'd say just very broadly, like the biggest challenge, and don't read anything into my personal politics on this because you'd probably get it wrong. But one of the biggest challenges in Democratic administrations tends to be tightening of regulations and expansion of regulations and complying with those new requirements. In Republican administrations, you have different challenges, but still challenges when things are getting looser and maybe you can do more and do new things. There's still a lot of legal and compliance work to do that in a way that protects your legal interests long term, and doesn't create risks that are going to come back to haunt you in a few years or even shorter term than that.
So I'm hearing that lawyers are still going to be out there trying to rein in their businesses, and at least make sure that we have all of the terms that we need in our contracts to keep our clients protected.
Yeah, for sure. That never goes away. Well, this was fun. Thanks for
Yeah,
joining me, Katerina and Sandy.
yeah, this was great.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to find out more, go to strategichealthlaw.com. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal advice. If you need legal advice on any topic we've covered, please consult an attorney with appropriate experience in health law. Our music is Galaxy Love by Johnny Duke. Until next time, thank you for listening to Health Law Simplified.